AITA for calling my husband's bluff when he used divorce papers as an ultimatum? My husband slammed the divorce papers down in front of me and told me, without lowering his voice, to accept his affair or leave the house we had built together. He thought fear would make me beg. He believed I would negotiate my dignity for a roof over my head and some stability. But while he was still waiting to see me cry, I took the pen and signed every page with a calmness that completely threw him off guard. The change in his face was immediate. His confidence turned into panic. He took a step forward, muttering that I was not understanding correctly, that this was not what he meant. I did understand, and better than he imagined. By handing the papers back to him, I knew I had just activated something he never saw coming. To understand why I signed without hesitation, you need to know everything that happened before. Before that day, I was the kind of woman who believed that relationship problems were solved by talking and that marriage was a partnership to be nurtured every single day, not just something that looked good in photos. We lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood in the southern part of the Dallas metro area. The kind of place where in the mornings you hear delivery trucks making their rounds and in the afternoons neighbors bring out chairs to sit in their front yards once the Texas heat eases up. My routine started early with brewing coffee while checking pending tasks on my laptop, organizing bills, calls, and deliveries, because I had always been practical and organized. He would leave a little later in a rush, complaining about the impossible traffic heading to his office downtown, and saying he had meetings that might run late. Our house was not a mansion, but every piece of furniture had a story behind it. We picked out the living room set together at a local furniture store after comparing prices for an entire weekend. We remodeled the kitchen gradually, paying in monthly installments, celebrating each small upgrade like it was a major victory. On Sundays we would head to the farmer's market for fresh produce, debate whether the prices for certain items were too high, and come home carrying bags while laughing about little things. From the outside, anyone would have said we were a stable couple, the kind that had already weathered the tough early years and settled into a comfortable rhythm. For years I felt secure. We shared expenses, plans, and goals. We talked about saving up to take a beach vacation in the summer, and maybe upgrading the car down the line. There were hugs at the end of the day and quick text messages asking if I needed anything from the grocery store. Nothing seemed out of place. Even when work started demanding more of his time, I understood. In a city like this, getting ahead often meant sacrificing some hours. Looking back now, however, I remember small details that I had overlooked at the time. Last-minute cancellations, dinners getting cold on the table while I waited for a call to say he was running late. Quick explanations that did not quite add up, but that I accepted because I trusted him. He changed how he handled his phone. Before, he would just leave it lying around. Then he started taking it with him everywhere, even to the bathroom. He also began criticizing minor things around the house, as if searching for faults where he once saw our shared effort. It was not a sudden change, but a growing distance that settled in like dust on the furniture. I kept doing my part, keeping the house in order, supporting his projects, believing the difficult phase would pass. I told myself that all couples go through tense times and that the important thing was not to give up at the first sign of trouble. That belief kept me steady, convinced that our relationship had a solid foundation. I never imagined that while I was working to keep our team strong, he was already looking at other options behind my back. The first real crack appeared on a random evening when he came home with a different scent on his shirt, a perfume that was not mine and did not belong to any place we usually visited together. He smiled when he noticed me picking up on it, and said someone at the office had sprayed on too much cologne. I nodded without arguing, although inside something began to stir, a small but persistent doubt warning me that the normal life I was protecting might not be as solid as I thought. After that night with the unfamiliar perfume, I could no longer look at our daily routine with the same sense of peace. Something inside me started connecting the dots on details I had previously dismissed. The late nights became more frequent, and the explanations grew shorter, as if any question was an accusation. He would say he was exhausted, that the pressure at work was intense, that he needed to focus on key projects. Yet his energy would shift whenever his phone buzzed. He could be tired one moment and then suddenly smile at the screen, typing quickly while angling it away so I could not see. He also changed small but telling habits. He added a new password to his phone and turned off visible notifications. He started taking a shower immediately upon walking in the door, sometimes before even greeting me properly. He bought new shirts he had never worn before and began paying attention to details that used to not matter to him, like the style of his watch or his haircut. It was not just his appearance, it was his whole attitude. He became distant during everyday conversations and avoided making weekend plans together, always claiming he had urgent work to finish. One afternoon I found a receipt in the pants he had left on the chair. It was from an upscale restaurant in uptown Dallas, a place we had never visited, because he used to say it was unnecessarily expensive. The date matched a supposed work dinner. The bill showed 2 meals and a bottle of wine. It was not definitive proof, but it was not a comfortable coincidence either. I kept the receipt without saying anything, and that night I watched his every gesture more closely. Messages started arriving at unusual hours. When I would naturally ask who was texting so late, he responded with annoyance, claiming I was distrustful for no reason. The strategy was clear: make me feel like I was overreacting. For days I doubted my intuition. I thought maybe stress was playing tricks on me. Even so, the sum of the details was already forming a picture I could not ignore. The moment that confirmed my suspicions happened on a Saturday morning. He said he was going to the office to catch up on late work. Hours later, while checking the banking app to pay a utility bill, I noticed a recent charge at a gift shop. It was not a special date, nor did he have a formal meeting scheduled. The purchase included something that was clearly not for me. In that instant I understood I was not imagining things. There was a parallel story unfolding while I was defending ours. I did not make a scene. I did not raise my voice. Instead, I decided to observe patiently, record dates, save receipts, and analyze every contradiction. If there was a hidden truth, I was going to find it complete, not fragmented. That was when I understood that continuing to trust blindly would only leave me vulnerable, and I made a silent decision that would change the course of everything. To stop believing in words and start investigating with facts. From that moment on, I stopped reacting like a wounded wife and started thinking like someone who needed absolute clarity. My background in business administration had always taught me to review data before making decisions. So I applied that exact same logic at home. I organized dates, compared bank transactions, and wrote down every inconsistency in a notebook I kept inside my drawer of important documents. I was not looking for a baseless confrontation. I wanted to understand the real scope of what was happening. I discovered that the charges at restaurants and stores were not isolated. There were small but constant transfers to an account I did not recognize. At first they seemed like insignificant payments, but upon adding them up I realized they represented a considerable amount. I also noticed cash withdrawals on the days he supposedly worked late. That information shifted my focus. It was no longer just about a possible affair, but about financial decisions made behind my back. One Tuesday afternoon, while he was taking a shower, he left his computer open in the study. I did not check personal messages. I went straight into the shared email where we received digital bank statements. There I found a confirmed reservation at a boutique hotel in Austin for the following weekend, right when he had told me he would be attending a work conference. The reservation included a double room and special services. I took pictures with my phone, saved the evidence, and logged out without altering anything. The missing piece appeared days later. I mistakenly received a notification in my own email because, without realizing it, he had registered my address as an alternate contact on a travel app. The message thanked him for a recent purchase and mentioned another person's name as a frequent companion. It was not a simple slip-up. It was an established relationship with a history and accumulated rewards. The betrayal was neither recent nor improvised. While gathering proof, I also confirmed something more disturbing. He had requested information to sell the house without consulting me. A real estate agent had sent details about appraisals and market conditions. I then understood that the ultimatum he would later throw at me was not going to be an impulsive outburst, but part of a plan where I had to either accept his new life or get out of the way. That discovery definitively changed my stance. I was no longer just a woman facing an affair, but someone protecting her assets and her stability. With every document saved and every screenshot stored, my fear transformed into determination. When he finally slammed the divorce papers down in front of me, he thought he was surprising me. What he did not know was that I had spent weeks staying ahead of his every move. And what I found after confirming the intention to sell our home was even more serious than I imagined, something that not only affected my marriage, but everything we had built over the years. When I dug deeper into the intention to sell the house, I discovered something that completely shattered any remaining consideration I might have had left. The real estate agent had not only sent general information, but had also received scanned personal documents, including copies of deeds and financial statements that I never authorized to be shared. My signature did not appear on any application, but I was included as if I had already agreed to the process. That meant he was willing to move forward, while ignoring my legal rights just to accelerate his new life plan. I carefully reviewed the dates and confirmed he had initiated consultations weeks before the ultimatum. While at home he talked about joint projects and kept up appearances in front of relatives. On the other hand, he was preparing the ground to leave me without stability. It was not just a romantic affair. It was a strategy to replace me without facing consequences. The thought that he intended to install another person in the space I helped build was not the most painful part. What really crossed the line was realizing he was willing to put my financial security at risk. I searched further and found emails where he mentioned he needed to resolve the issue as soon as possible, because he wanted to formalize his new relationship. That sentence made me realize I had not been his priority for a long time. He had turned years of shared effort into an uncomfortable procedure he had to close in order to move forward. That coldness gave me clarity. I could not allow him to manipulate documents or financial decisions that also belonged to me. The ultimate moral blow came when I found out he had spoken to my own family, insinuating that I was going through a difficult phase and that perhaps it would be better to sell the property to avoid conflicts. He was trying to build a narrative where he appeared reasonable and I seemed unstable. That attempt to discredit me in front of those who know me was the confirmation that I was no longer facing just a romantic betrayal, but a calculated attempt to isolate me and weaken my position. At that point I stopped feeling guilt or doubts. I understood that defending myself was not an act of pride, but of justice. I was not fighting to keep an empty marriage. I was protecting my name, my assets, and the truth. The woman who signed those papers did not do it out of impulse, but because she already knew the battle would not be won with tears, but with strategy. After confirming how far he was willing to go, I understood that any impulsive move could play against me. I needed to act with precision. I sought out a family law attorney recommended by a coworker, a specialist in divorce and property matters. I brought her copies of bank statements, email screenshots, transfer records, and the information related to the possible sale of the house. She listened to everything without interrupting, and at the end she told me something that changed my perspective. The one who gets ahead with clear evidence has the advantage. For several weeks I followed my routine with apparent normality. I made coffee, answered work emails, and held brief conversations at home as if nothing were happening. Meanwhile, my attorney initiated formal requests to block any attempt to sell the house without mutual consent. She also guided me to protect shared accounts and ensure no funds could be moved without dual authorization. Every step was discreet, calculated, and backed by documents. In parallel, I organized a digital file with exact dates, transferred amounts, and confirmed reservations. I was not seeking revenge. I was seeking clarity before a judge if the time came. We confirmed that several transfers to the unknown account could be considered misuse of shared marital assets. That information strengthened my legal position and proved that the decision to sign did not mean giving up my rights. Emotionally, I also prepared myself. I stopped expecting honest explanations and accepted that the version he offered at home did not match reality. I practiced staying calm in the face of provocations and avoided unnecessary arguments. I knew any explosive reaction could be used to support the narrative he was trying to build about me. Strategic silence became my best tool. An additional detail reinforced my determination. We discovered that the hotel reservation was scheduled to take place right after he planned to give me the ultimatum. His plan was to close the chapter with me and officially start the next one, trusting that I would accept it without resistance. He did not count on the fact that his every step was already documented. When he finally slammed the divorce papers hoping to intimidate me, I had already taken preventive measures. Signing was not a surrender. It was the activation of a process where his own actions would be exposed at the right moment. While he believed he had total control, The legal framework was beginning to adjust in my favor. The tension grew in silence. There was no yelling or dramatic scenes at home during those days, only a thick, almost uncomfortable calm that announced something big was about to happen. Every document sent, every notification received, and every consultation completed brought us closer to a point of no return. And then the day came when everything I had gathered would stop being a secret kept in folders, and would become an impossible truth to deny in front of more people. The moment arrived during a family lunch organized by his parents to calmly discuss the separation. The invitation sounded cordial, almost conciliatory. Brothers, sisters-in-law, and a couple of close friends who had always seen us as a stable couple attended. The table was set with familiar dishes. The atmosphere seemed peaceful, and at first glance it was a gathering to keep up appearances. However, I knew that setting would be the exact point where the truth would come to light. From the moment we sat down, he tried to steer the conversation toward a convenient narrative. He commented that our differences had become irreconcilable, and that the healthiest thing was to sell the house to avoid prolonged conflicts. He spoke in a measured tone, as if he were making a responsible decision for the good of both of us. Several glances turned toward me, expecting an emotional reaction that would confirm his version. I took a deep breath and asked for a few minutes to clarify certain points before any conclusions were drawn. I pulled out a discreet folder I carried in my purse and placed on the table copies of transfers, hotel reservations, and emails related to the intention to sell without my consent. The initial murmur turned into absolute silence. No one expected organized documents or precise dates backing up every statement. I calmly explained that the real estate consultations had begun weeks before the ultimatum, and that part of the shared money had been used to maintain an inappropriate relationship. I did not raise my voice, I simply detailed verifiable facts. I showed the confirmation of the hotel schedule to take place right after handing me the divorce papers. Expressions shifted from disbelief to bewilderment. He tried to interrupt me, arguing that they were misunderstandings and that I was exaggerating normal work situations. In response, I pointed out the recurring transfers to a personal account unrelated to the marriage, and the improper inclusion of my data in real estate procedures. Every document spoke for itself. The tension at the table was palpable. Even his parents avoided looking directly at him. The person who sought to present himself as reasonable was left with no arguments in the face of concrete evidence. It was no longer a discussion based on emotions, but a clear exposition of actions. The collective silence weighed more than any reproach. Some relatives asked for further explanations, and others simply looked down, realizing the story had more layers than they had been told. At the end, I just said I signed the papers because I would not accept humiliating conditions, but I also would not allow the truth or our shared assets to be manipulated. I closed the folder and stood up with serenity. There was no screaming or scandals. The humiliation was a direct consequence of his own actions revealed to those who most valued his image. That meeting marked the point where he lost control of the narrative. From then on, the consequences began to unfold inevitably and progressively, affecting areas he never imagined losing. After that meal, nothing was ever the same for him. The image of a prudent and responsible man he had built over the years began to crack with a speed not even I anticipated. His parents, who initially thought of stepping in to mediate, decided to stay out of it when they confirmed that the information presented was verifiable. The trust they had in him was no longer automatic. Now his every word was questioned. In the professional sphere, repercussions did not take long. One of the attendees at the meeting had an indirect connection to the company where he worked, and the rumor about the misuse of shared funds began to circulate. It was not a scandalous public accusation, but rather internal doubts about his financial management. Shortly after, he was called in for an administrative review regarding transactions that coincided with the periods when he made personal transfers from shared accounts. The investigation did not declare him guilty of a crime, but it affected his credibility within the team. At the same time, the relationship he had tried to formalize began to show cracks. The other person discovered that the sale of the house would not proceed with the promised ease, and that the legal process would be more complicated than expected. What seemed like a stable new beginning turned into uncertainty. The expectations he had created did not match the legal reality he now faced. On the financial front, The preventive measures limited his free access to joint funds. The expenses he previously made without explanation now required justification. The idea of resolving everything quickly turned into a drawn-out procedure where every decision had to pass through legal review. That loss of control frustrated him more than any direct confrontation. Socially, he also felt the impact. Invitations he used to receive frequently decreased, and some friends chose to keep their distance. It was not an explicit rejection, but an obvious caution. When someone builds their reputation on stability and coherence, a public exposure with concrete evidence profoundly changes collective perception. While all this was happening, I maintained a firm and discreet posture. I did not celebrate his downfall or seek to amplify rumors. I simply allowed the consequences to run their natural course. Every effect was tied to decisions he himself made. The difference was that now he could no longer hide them behind convenient speeches. The most significant thing was watching how the confidence with which he threw that ultimatum completely disappeared. He went from imposing conditions to trying to negotiate more balanced terms. However, the process was already underway and did not depend on improvised promises. The fall was not an instantaneous event. It was a gradual sequence where he lost financial control, professional credibility, social backing, and emotional stability. Everything he thought was secure began to crumble piece by piece, proving that underestimating someone who stays silent can carry a much higher cost than anticipated. After the consequences began to become visible, a moment arrived that was more important to me than any legal hearing: talking to my family without distorted versions in the middle. For weeks I had kept quiet so as not to worry them without having clarity, but now the facts were confirmed and I needed to close that circle with honesty. We met at my mother's house on a Sunday afternoon. The atmosphere had no tension, just expectation. I told them everything from the beginning without dramatizing or exaggerating, explaining how I gathered evidence before signing, and why I decided to act that way. My father listened attentively without interrupting, and when I finished he said something that sustained me inside. Dignity is not negotiated, it is protected. That phrase confirmed that my decision had not been impulsive, but necessary. My sister also chimed in, reminding me that for years I always prioritized stability and dialogue, and that no one could accuse me of not having tried to sustain the marriage. Hearing that freed me from any residual guilt. I was not the one who had broken agreements. I only responded when they tried to impose unfair conditions on me. Days later, another significant conversation occurred. His own parents asked to see me alone. I thought it would be an awkward encounter, but it was different from what I imagined. They acknowledged they had witnessed the public exposure, and that upon reviewing the documents, they understood the magnitude of what happened. His mother, with a firm voice, expressed that no one deserves to be displaced from their home that way. It was not a formal apology, but it was a clear validation that the truth was on my side. That support changed the emotional dynamics of the process. I was no longer facing rumors or judgments based on his initial version. The narrative became balanced because the facts spoke for themselves. I felt the weight I had carried in silence beginning to decrease. There was a final moment that sealed my peace of mind. I received a message from a close cousin who had been at the family lunch. She wrote to me that she admired the serenity with which I handled the situation and that many people would have reacted with anger, but few with strategy. That external perception reinforced my conviction that acting calmly was the best choice. The validation from those who know me did not mean celebrating the breakup, but rather confirming that protecting my stability was the right thing to do. That certainty allowed me to look forward without resentment, understanding that strength is not always shown with noise, but with consistency. With firm emotional support and the legal process underway, I was ready to focus on what came next. Rebuilding my life without the constant shadow of a threat, transforming the closing of a chapter into the conscious beginning of a much more solid one. With the legal process moving forward and the emotional backing now firm, the time came to reorganize my life from the practical to the internal. The house, which had been the stage for tension and ultimatums, stopped feeling like disputed territory and began to become a space for redefinition. Not everything changed overnight, but every small adjustment made a clear difference. I reorganized rooms, donated objects that no longer made sense, and transformed the study into my own space for work and personal projects. I painted a wall a lighter shade, opened windows more frequently, and let in light where before I only saw memories. It was not an expensive remodel, but a symbolic one. Every change represented a conscious decision to move forward without dragging resentment. In the professional realm, I accepted a proposal I had previously postponed to prioritize shared schedules. I started collaborating on a project that involved greater responsibility and better income. That decision not only strengthened my financial stability, but also my confidence. I discovered that many personal goals had been put on hold to sustain a relationship that was no longer reciprocal. My daily routine acquired another rhythm. The mornings were no longer marked by awkward silences and were filled with concrete plans. I went back to visiting the farmer's market, but now without the feeling of waiting for approval for every decision. I resumed activities I had left behind, like exercise classes and get-togethers with friends who were always present, even though I was not always available. I also worked on my emotional state. I did not deny the pain, but I decided not to make it my identity. I sought professional guidance to process the betrayal without it turning into permanent mistrust. I understood that closing a cycle firmly does not mean hardening your heart, but learning to set clearer boundaries. As the months passed, the divorce stopped being a central theme in my thoughts. It became just another procedure within a larger process of growth. The house remained under fair conditions and the assets were protected according to the law. What started as a threat ended up strengthening my autonomy. There was a revealing moment one random afternoon, while I was arranging books on the renovated shelf. I realized that the silence no longer weighed heavily, it was peaceful. There was no fear of ultimatums or constant tension, only stability built upon the conscious decision not to accept less than I deserve. That new stage was not about proving anything to anyone, but about reconnecting with the version of myself that had been put on pause. With clear goals, organized finances, and sincere relationships around me, I understood that losing a marriage does not equate to losing your way. Sometimes it is exactly what allows you to recover it with greater clarity and strength. Over time, I understood that the moment the divorce papers hit my face was not the beginning of my downfall, but the exact point where I regained control of my story. For years, I believed that protecting a relationship meant weathering any storm, but I learned that resistance without limits can become a dangerous silence. I did not sign out of pride or anger. I signed because I understood that accepting humiliating conditions would have been a betrayal of myself. I also discovered something rarely said out loud. Whoever issues an ultimatum usually does so convinced that the other person has more fear than options. That calculation only works when fear dominates. In my case, the fear existed, but the clarity was greater. Preparing myself before reacting changed the outcome completely. Gathering evidence, getting legal advice, and acting with serenity not only protected my assets, it also preserved my reputation and my emotional balance. If I can advise anything about this, never ignore recurring signs. Intuition does not appear out of nowhere. It is formed by small details demanding attention. To observe, confirm, and then decide is more powerful than confronting without backing. Dignity is not defended with shouting, but with firm boundaries and consistent actions. Another important lesson is that stability does not depend on a single person. For a long time, I thought keeping the marriage intact was synonymous with success, but I understood that the true achievement is preserving inner peace. Losing a relationship based on deceit is not a failure. It is freeing up space for a more honest life. Today I look back without resentment. I do not need his downfall to continue or his story to worsen for me to feel balanced. The house stopped being a symbol of conflict and became a reminder that I can rebuild without depending on threats. If you are going through a similar situation, remember that information is power and calmness is strategy. Before reacting, understand. Before giving in, evaluate. Before remaining silent, define your boundaries. No one can negotiate your dignity if you do not put it on the table. Signing those papers was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a more conscious and resolute version of myself. Comment: I've been thinking about this story quite a bit lately. It really shows me how important it is to hold on to our self-respect. You deserve to be in relationships where your worth is fully honored. Setting firm boundaries is actually an act of kindness toward yourself. Taking responsibility for your own peace can transform everything. Healing often begins the moment we stop accepting what hurts us deeply. I hope this encourages you to look honestly at the relationships in your life. Remember that your dignity should never be something you negotiate away. Choosing calmness and clarity is one of the strongest things we can do. Let's all move forward, treating ourselves and others with more respect and care. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.